Great.
I'll start.
Yeah, just a moment. I will start and give it to you. Welcome to Ambedkar Karwa. We are discussing today race and caste, how Dhamma is developing in United States and India. We have with us a distinguished guest, Alan Senauke from Berkeley Zen Center, California. California today is the capital of modern Buddhism. In India, in the past, we have witnessed many schools of Buddhism in India. After Dhamma revolution led by Dr. Ambedkar, many marginalized communities has embraced Buddhism. And we can see today how the census is growing with the Buddhist population from various states. People from marginalized communities, not only from followers of Dr. Ambedkar, but from other communities, which is usually called here as other backward communities, are also embracing Buddhism. People who are suffering from various discriminations are looking towards Buddhism as a way to come out of this hell of caste. In California, where there are many centers from different traditions, Alan is coming from Berkeley Zen Center. He is a musician. He is sort of Zen master and engaged activist working in South Asia, in US, in Myanmar, in India through his Clearview projects. He is being associated with many young Ambedkarites through Nagruka Institute and engaged in social activism. He himself has been activist for a long period of time. So I request Anuradha to welcome Alan on behalf of IIDF and introduce him before tossing to Alan Senauke.
Jai Bhim to all. On behalf of Indian Ambedkarite Doctors Federation and Ambedkar Caravan Media, I welcome you all. Today, to take forward our discussion on race and caste, we have the honor of hosting Vice-Abbot of Berkeley Zen Center, Hozan Alan Senauke from United States of America. Hozan Sensei began practicing at BZC on Dwight Way and later established his practice as a student of Sojun Roshi in the early 1980s. He was ordained as a Zen priest at BZC in 1989, receiving Dhamma Transmission from Sojun at Tasajara in 1998. After serving as a Tanto or head of practice at BZC since 1997, Hozan was installed as Vice-Abbot in 2007. He is the past president of the Soto Zen Buddhist Association. Hozan also has wide experience and a global perspective on engaged Buddhism as a force for social transformation. From 1991, he was in the leadership of Buddhist Peace Fellowship and the International Network of Engaged Buddhism. Hozan is founding director of Clearview project, offering Buddhist-based resources and support with a focus on Indian Dalit Buddhists, Myanmar and the Rohingyas, and the prisoners in the United States. Hozan was born in Brooklyn, New York in 1947. He brings to our gathering a rich life as a writer and editor, a social justice activist, and respected folk musician. Alan has been a resident at Berkeley Zen Center since 1985. He and his wife, Laurie, have two grown children, Sylvie and Alex, who grew up at the Berkeley Zen Center. Welcome, sir. I now request Priyadarshi, sir, to take over the proceedings.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anuradha. So before the session, we were just chatting with Alan, and Alan has just informed that his elder son is also now a priest at Japan in a Zen center. So greetings to your son and your daughter who is engaged as a social activist in Chicago. Welcome, Alan, and over to you.
Thank you, Priyadarshi, and thank you, Anuradha. My son has been to Nagaloka and to Manuski, and he loved it there. And he wears a picture of Dr. Ambedkar around his neck. So, Jai Bhim. I want to greet you by saying that actually we are a family of Ambedkarites in my household here in Berkeley, and Dr. Ambedkar has been a hero to me for many years. So that's one point. The other point I would own as we're speaking is that I speak to you as a person of significant privileges. I am male. I am characterized as white. I'm older. I'm educated, and I am in a position of leadership in my communities. These are all privileges that are quite related to privileges that you might encounter on the basis of caste or on the basis of other forms of domination. But I go back to something that the Buddha wrote in one of the early sutras in the Pali Canon, in the Majjhima Nikaya. There's a sutta called the Vasetta Sutta. And in this sutta, while he delineates the different kinds of birth of beings that, some are born as quadrupeds, some are born as dwelling in water, some are born that swim, that fly. He said very clearly, with humans, no differences of birth make a distinctive mark in them. Not in hairs, nor in the head, nor in the ears and the eyes, and so forth. He goes on. He says, nor in color or in voice. Here, birth makes no distinctive mark, as with other kinds of birth. In human bodies in themselves, nothing distinctive can be found. Distinction among human beings is a purely verbal designation. For name and clan and caste are assigned as mere designations in the world. And this is where he also famously says, one is not a Brahmin by birth. One is, and I don't like using the word Brahmin, one is not noble by birth, one is noble by action. And so it would be wonderful if we lived by that principle. We have those principles in India, in the Indian Constitution, and we have them in the American Constitution engraved in our laws, but not marked by our actions as a society. Our actions as a society are still distinguished by race, by class, by color, and by caste. And while the manifestation of that is not identical between India and the United States. It's close in a way that I think bears some examining. So I wanted to say a little about my background very quickly, because I think it's relevant. Just to say that the Zen tradition that I occupy was certainly not invented here in the West. It was brought to us by teachers from another culture, by teachers who are Asian, by teachers who look different, say, than I do. And they gave their lives to transmit and teach us the Dharma because they thought that it was universal and was a way in which we could all awaken. Now, the Dharma in my country is in our hands. Those teachers have passed on, but we have to remember them. By background, by birth, my birth tradition, my birth was in a Jewish religious background, or a Jewish ethnic background. And that has shaped me in many ways, culturally, intellectually, and carrying kind of a seed experience of oppression. But I chose not to follow that path, that religious path. And so I don't. I respect it, but it's not what I follow. I'm really practice Buddhism. But it's important to remember that throughout world history, going back as far as the caste system in India, going back 4,000 years, Jewish people were oppressed almost everywhere that they went. They were seen as less than human. They were seen as expendable. They were hated for no good reason, mistrusted. And, in the modern world, we saw that culminate in Germany in the 1930s and 40s, when 6 million Jews were murdered, and also I want to add at least 1 million gypsies. And that's a whole. I hope you'll have. Have you had any discussion with any of the Roma and Bedkarites yet? Yeah, and it's very parallel. But for me, I didn't experience that loss directly, but it was on my parents' minds, and the parts of our families that remained behind in Europe were all exterminated. They're gone, never to be heard from again. So I also would say that my own experience in school, when I started school in first grade, I went to a private school, and I experienced directly and indirectly anti-Semitism. And it just as a fact, what's interesting to me is that I continued in that school through the 8th year, and then I transferred to a public school. As soon as I transferred to a public school, I had many friends, and those are still my friends 50 and 60 years later. From the private school where I experienced anti-Semitism, I have not one friend. So we are marked by these various oppressions. So on the front of my house, there is a Black Lives Matter sign. And as I travel around Berkeley and Oakland, I see many people, white and black, who are showing this message in their homes and on the storefronts of their businesses. And that is because Black Lives Matter is a statement that our society has to grapple with. These are turning words for our whole nation, and they are alive, and they are challenging. They're starting a very difficult discussion. And what I would say is that I see that discussion is happening in my Buddhist community. And it's happening in a lot of Buddhist communities. We take a look around us and we see that the majority of our participants and members are white. And there are certainly people of color, African American, Asian, Latino. They are there in sometimes in small numbers, sometimes in more sizable numbers. But one thing we see is that a lot of the power structures of our Buddhist communities are not shared or not in the hands of people of color, if you will say, of people and of people of backgrounds other than the white, which is a fading majority in our country. We will not be a majority in 30 years. The demographics will be such that we will not be a majority. White people will not be a majority in this country. Just as I think that the demographics in India of Dalit and Shudras and other scheduled castes and tribes is an increasing factor, and it will be a dominant reality. So what I see in our communities is that if I go back to some core principles of Dr. Ambedkar, if I go back to liberty, equality, fraternity. I've been involved in civil rights work in the United States since I was in high school. Some of you may have heard of the famous March on Washington in 1963, where Dr. King and others gave speeches. I was there. I was there with my high school friends. I remember where we were standing. We all went down together, and what I feel is that the first two principles, liberty and equality, are glaringly obvious, and they're easy to hold on to as principles. The idea of equality is something that I think the Buddha was citing in the Vasetta Sutta. The idea of liberty, where you have two kinds of liberty. You have positive and negative liberty. You have liberty. The negative side is liberty from oppression, liberty from violence, liberty from discrimination. And the positive side of liberty is liberty to become whom you are capable of becoming. So those are have always been pretty obvious principles in my mind. Fraternity is more difficult because, and this is where I think there is a resonance between the experience of race in the United States and the experience of caste in India. The lack of fraternity means that we live side by side in different communities with different worlds that don't intersect often. Now, that's not completely true, but it's largely true. It's said that the most segregated hour of the week in America is 9:00 on Sunday morning, when people go to church. White people go to their churches, black people go to their churches, Latino people go to their churches. And we don't have all of the marks of caste are, a lot of them are familiar to us, in the simplest form, and in the most fundamental form. The intermarriage, say intercaste marriage, interracial marriage. Interracial marriage was illegal in many states until the United States until the 1970s. Illegal. Interdining. I've been reading a book about a famous black baseball player, and until the late 1960s, in many parts of the South, black people were not allowed to eat in restaurants with white people. And in fact, for my generation, students, the black students who came to Columbia University, where I studied, came from a background of segregation, a background where they had completely separate schools, and where you had water fountains to drink from, and those fountains were labeled white and colored, where children were not able to even share a swimming pool for fear of pollution. When you hear about all this, it certainly sounds like the markings of caste, right? And I regret that there's been less exchange between people in India and people in the United States on these questions. I think this right now is an attempt to do it. Things that you're doing in the Ambedkar Caravan are a way of bringing people to see some commonalities. But recently, there's a book that's been published just in the last 2 weeks, a book that's called Caste, The Origins of Our Discontents, by a woman named Isabel Wilkerson. It's getting very prominent reviews and very positive reviews. And to me, it's a relief. I don't necessarily agree with everything that she says, but it's, with some of you, my working in with the Ambedkarite communities over the last 10 years has built some of the strongest relationships that I have, and relationships with people who I learn from and whose vision of the world is very similar to mine. And we talk about this. We talk about the questions of race in the United States and caste in India. And it always seemed to me that there were aspects of both in each. And so in this book, what Wilkerson looks at, she's looking primarily at what's happening, what she sees in the United States, and she's defining it as caste, which includes race. So what she says is race in the United States is the visible agent of the unseen force of caste. Caste is the bones and race is the skin. So it's when she talks about caste, she's talking about the systematic domination of one group or one population over another or over others. And it has a variety of, she identifies a variety of elements that go into caste. And I'm going to just run through them quickly. She talks about one of the defining, these are 8 defining features. One is divine will. The idea that the social stratification is something that has been ordained by God or by the gods. It's beyond just a human control. And we really see that in our holy books. We see that certainly in holy books in Hinduism, and you see it in holy books in the Western religious traditions. You really don't see that in Buddhism. You may see it in Buddhist societies, but you don't see it in Buddhist texts. The second point she makes is that this status, this caste, is inherited. You acquire it at birth, and it's unchanging, and you pass it on to your children. So it's a self-defined system. And then it, as I mentioned, there's endogamy, that intermarriage is prohibited. And we had that as a system of laws in the United States. I'm not sure there are any of them left, but they existed up until the 1970s, 1980s. You have the question of purity and pollution. The belief that the dominant caste is pure and must be protected against pollution. And this is, as I said, this is the basis of segregation and segregated facilities for swimming, for eating, for hotel accommodation, etc. You have occupational hierarchy, which I think is very familiar to you. which is the setting aside of desirable and undesirable occupations according to caste or according to skin color. You have dehumanization, which is the denial of human dignity to people in the lower caste position, and through their through the way they're punished. And we can see this in the U.S. prison system, which goes along with the next point, which is terror and cruelty. Terror and cruelty as a means of enforcement of the caste system and control of lower caste people. And, in a sense, this is what we're seeing in the vastly disproportionate police murders that make the news in the United States. But we also see it. I've been working in the prison system for 20 years, and you see the imprisonment of African American and Latino prisoners way out of proportion to their reality in the general population. And finally, the last point is inherent superiority and inferiority of the castes. So the belief that people of one caste are inherently superior to other castes. And that's expressed as restrictions on how people dress, on how they comport themselves, and also on what occupations they have. I think the piece that's missing that is a factor, I don't know, and it's a matter of discussion. I don't know to what extent you see it as a factor in India, but here there is an economic basis to all of this. That the wealth of my country was based on slave labor. The success of the American experiment was based not just on the one hand on slave labor, and on the other hand on the theft of land from indigenous people who were exterminated. So there's an economic basis, and if you look at the economics in that history, it's quite astonishing. I would guess that that's a factor in Indian civilization as well, but I'm not as familiar with it. And I'll bet if it was a factor, certainly Dr. Ambedkar, as a superlative economist, spoke about this, wrote about this. So I think there are great parallels between our situation in the United States and the situation of scheduled castes, scheduled tribes in India. I think there would be great if there was common cause made, and a common exploration of our distinct situations. And then there's the question of your situation is different than my situation, because the situations of, I assume, the people that I'm talking to here today, I assume that they're largely followers of Dr. Ambedkar. And so probably they are largely of what we might call an oppressed background. And even though, many of you are really highly educated, you are still feeling in various and significant ways the aspects of that oppression. So you have your work to come forth and transform society, which I really feel is that's what's happening. When I first heard about Dr. Ambedkar, when I first read about the Buddhist movement, which for me was in about 1989, I immediately felt this is the essence of engaged Buddhism. And I immediately felt, I want to see this. I want to see how this works. So that's one side of the work. For people like myself here in the United States, we have a different work. And part of that work is trying to understand there's so much implicit bias, implicit prejudice, that the privilege that I kind of laid out to you at the beginning, it operates in ways that are unconscious. Sometimes it operates in ways that are conscious, but it often operates in ways that are unconscious. For example, one thing I've been talking about lately is the way one uses the word we, W-E. That I hear it again and again in my own communities. When the word we is used, it presumes everyone is white. It presumes that the world, what is normal, what we think of as normal, is what we're seeing through the lens of whiteness. And it serves to disappear the people of color, black people, and so forth, who are literally there in the room. And I hear this again and again. And it's not, not through evil people, not through manipulative people, just through the fact that the indoctrination of caste is so deep. It's not just this surface layer that you can peel off. It goes deep into the foundations of all of our thinking and actions, and we've learned it all of our lives. People have learned it, oppressed people have learned it from the standpoint of oppression, and dominant people have learned it from the position of dominance. And so the work in our communities is to, first of all, to uncover that, to do this work together, particularly for the so-called white people, to investigate and take responsibility for what our history has been. And that's how we manifest that we really mean that Black Lives Matter. Because it means understanding what the experience of Black lives are. But the other side, the really hard side, is to transform our institutions, our centers, our organizations, so that they are not dominated by whiteness, so that they are not dominated by the upper caste. And, for me, what that means in part is like, I have to get out of the way. I have to do what I can to encourage people who have leadership capacities, and then get out of the way. And that means stepping aside from certain privileges. And let me tell you, that's not so easy. um, but I think that I think that that is what quite a number of my friends particularly in the Zen community, uh, are wrestling with. You know, if we take the Buddha's teaching seriously and see that there's no difference in birth, uh, there's differences, and Dr. Ambedkar remarked, there's differences in people's capacities and capabilities, but they're not they have nothing to do with the color of your skin or the caste that you were born into. If we take that really seriously, then uh, if we're not enacting that in our communities, then we are not in accord with the Buddha's teachings. So that's my challenge, and I think if it's okay, that's where I'll stop for today, and we can take some questions.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, thank you, Alan. It was very nice and very engaging talk. Uh, Taking the Sutta, Vasita Sutta, and then reflecting on our own Zen center. I know it's not an easy, even to admit. Uh, we come across many such institutions where they don't admit, even though the diversity is there, but they don't accept the diversity and they don't give that baton so that it can be taken forward. It's very courageous of you uh, to admit that sort of thing, and also to accept it as a challenge that we have to work very consciously on these unconscious opinions which we are thinking and taking it as a granted by, and you very captured very beautifully with these two words we. uh, uh, how you did mention about the Black Lives Matter and sort of uh, that American society has to grapple with that statement. I want to ask you, Alan, that when this California is being hub of many Buddhist centers from various traditions, maybe from Theravada and other great teachers, how they responded to this Black Lives Matter?
I think a lot of them responded very positively, and the response doesn't necessarily go very deep. You know, of so it's easy to put a sign on your door. It's easy to say you support something. It's harder actually to support it. So, for example, one thing that's happening is my wife and I, and she's doing this mostly. We found an organization called Standing Up for Racial Justice, which uh, is literally doing work in support of Black Lives Matter, but it's mostly white people, and so people have an opportunity to do concrete activity that supports uh, Black Lives Matter in a legal context, in the context of defunding the police and so forth. And so uh, that's slowly unfolding.
Yeah. Yeah. You also talked about the new book by Isabel Wilkerson, that Caste, the
Yeah.
origin of the discontents, and where she make a very bold statement. But uh, uh, I do think that it will certainly make a difference in order to understand the caste issues in India, particularly when Oprah Winfrey, like personalities who are distributing that sort of books to various CEOs, corporate companies heads, which will certainly address the issue of caste. I mean, you might be recently aware about the case of discrimination in the IT company like Cisco. So I think though you might be having difference of opinion and not agree in totality with what the book is argumenting, but I guess it will certainly help in order to advocate caste issues, the suffering and discrimination faced by Dalits in India, and to countries like Nepal, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and to some extent Sri Lanka. The Dalit issues, the caste issues will be communicated at a larger level. And I do think that America has not been participant to many of those CERT conventions,
No.
conferences, uh, Convention on Elimination of Racial Discrimination. And I guess we certainly need to work together so that we can build those pressure of uh, sort of accepting caste as a factor in United Nations to measure up those policies and various conventions. So this book might pave a way forward to advocate those sort of issues. Uh, another point which I want to
Let me speak to that a moment.
yeah.
I think that the book quite possibly uh, will be very, very helpful. In the end, I don't think her solutions are uh, sufficient. I mean, what she says, and this is a place where Buddhists go very easily. They go to in this case, go to a place of compassion and empathy. And what she says is her hope is that that empathy, a widening empathy, will change the the practices of discrimination. I don't think so. Uh, I think that there have to be structural, legal changes that allow people that kind of create circumstances where people are working together or living together and interacting in various ways. Empathy will arise from proximity. Empathy won't arise from just it's a good idea. And that it'll be forged in difficulty because uh, you know the whole system of caste, as Dr. Ambedkar spoke of it, as graded inequality, or I like degraded inequality. Uh, and that's the system of racism as caste that we have here. Um, that system is dependent upon a infinitely graded perception of privilege. And in order to break down the system, the people with the greatest accumulation of privilege are going to have to let go of privileges. And that is not, that's where we say, that's where the rubber meets the road. that that is not easy to ask people to give up privileges. Uh, you know, or because we see the world as a zero sum reality. We see the world as if one gains, one loses. Now, that is not, in the ultimate, that's not a Buddhist point of view, but in the relative, it's not completely mistaken. So that's where it's going to be really hard, and empathy is not just something that's going to grow like a flower. Anyway, so I think I feel like she writes really well, and she makes so many great points, and then kind of doesn't pull it all together. Because to pull it together implies a revolutionary perspective.
Right. Let go is not that easy, and we do say it often while practicing meditation. But yes, it's not easy. Over to you, Anuradha, for questions.
Thank you, Hozan Alan sir, for such a wonderful talk. The question is, as a practitioner of engaged Buddhism, what steps do you suggest for, coming up with a parity in terms of privileges and letting go?
Wow. I really think that at this moment in time in our country, we really need to honestly investigate the basis of power, of economic power, political power, and social power. And we need to investigate, each of us needs to investigate our role in that system. And that is, to me, that is you could say that's one of the factors of enlightenment in Buddhism. It's investigating the dharmas. The power and agency that people have or don't have in society is a manifestation of dharma, positive and negative. And we have to investigate these and say, is this a wholesome dharma? Is this an unwholesome dharma? If it's wholesome, can I embrace it and further it? If it's unwholesome, can I stand against it and help reveal it? So I think that's right now, that's the place where I think we're at.
Thank you.
And I think one other thing, I think for engaged Buddhists in the West, which has always been a real question for me, or troubling reality, is part of that investigation is also seeing that we are part of one world. That the global corporate capitalism, for example, is also an expression of one world, but it's expression on the basis of exploitation. But we belong to the world on the basis of interconnection. So, as I was saying in the beginning, look at where the Dharma that we love here in the West, came from Japan, came from Vietnam, came from Korea, came from Burma, Thailand, India, Nepal, Tibet. It came from all of these countries in Asia. And so for us to have no concern about the reality of those countries is that's unwholesome. That's really missing our responsibility. And, honestly, what I've seen is there are very few people that I have met over the years who are knowledgeable or really interested in what's going on uh, around the world. That's why I really value the friendships that we've created in the International Network of Engaged Buddhism. If it wasn't for the International Network of Engaged Buddhism, you and I would not be having this conversation now. You know, it's because we recognize that our entire world reality is dependent upon each other.
Yes. That's absolutely right, Alan, and that's a wonderful answer. Thank you. We have a question from the audience, and so a couple of them have written, quite a few of them, in fact, have written to us, and they have loved the talk, and they're also very curious about the books that they are able to see. So, would you be able to tell us more about the books that you're reading currently and that are there in your library right now?
Yeah. Well, I'm reading this book, Caste, The Origin of Our Discontents by Isabel Wilkerson. Should I write this stuff out in the chat?
Yeah, otherwise, while posting it, we will certainly put it.
Let me post it later. Is that okay?
Yeah.
And there are a number of really cutting edge books on race that are coming out, including within the Buddhist within Buddhist circles. And what I can do is I can make a little reading list, and I'll send it to Priyadarshi later today, and you can share it on the Facebook page or whatever. But there's a lot of really good and clear-minded thinking that's going on now. I don't think, it often bothers me that connections. This is the first book that I've seen that has a mass market that connects to the caste issues in India. And it's also true that people don't know. I would say progressive people, even Buddhist people, don't, for the most part, they don't know of Dr. Ambedkar in the U.S. I'll say they all know of Gandhi, and so that's a delicate issue, because critiques of Gandhi don't, they're not easily accepted, but they don't even know of Dr. Ambedkar. And to me, Dr. Ambedkar is much more in line with Martin Luther King, because they were advocates of human rights, civil rights, economic rights, not of nationalism. So I as soon as I read about Ambedkar, I just thought, yes. So, we need to do some more education about Dr. Ambedkar.
Your dear friend Christopher Quinn was to author some book, particularly to address the US audience on Dr. Ambedkar. We need to follow him with what happened to his project. There are a couple of questions coming up, Alan, but we are running out of time. I will.
Okay.
There is another question from your friend Dr. Satish Ambarkar, but I will send that questions to you because
Please.
it's a wider question, and And certainly, as you said, INEP at one point of time need to engage with those protection of Buddhist heritage sites. So, so far, at least I am not aware whether INEP has talked on it, but we
I don't think so. Not really.
yeah.
We
Uh,
talked about it, we talked about it 25 years ago when I went to Bangladesh. We were talking about it, but there was no power. Nobody had the ability to protect those sites.
so
Let me just say, I don't know how you do this, but I'm happy to address people's questions, and you can put them in contact with me if you feel
sure.
that's appropriate.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
just do that. Email is probably the best.
Right, right. So thank you, Alan, for giving such an time to discuss on these subjects, and it's really wonderful to see how Buddhist Center in United States are discussing and grappling with this issue of or with the statement of Black Lives Matter and the difficulties and opinions which are being discussed within those Buddhist circle. It's thank you for lovely talk.
Thank you, Priyadarshi. Thank you, Anuradha, and thank you all of the folks out there in YouTube land. Jai Bhim.